So recently, I just reread one of my favorite books of all time, and it's Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, as you can see right over here. And Blood Meridian was written all the way back and published in 1985. And for most people, it's kind of considered Cormac McCarthy's like magnum opus or his best work. And it's actually not too long as well. It's like 350 pages, maybe a little bit above that. And that being said, I would definitely say that it's not an easy read. And this is because A, for its subject material, and B, for the way that it's written, because McCarthy uses a very dense prose, and his writing a lot of the time comes off as very like heavy-handed poetry, but it's very descriptive as well. There's a lot of tactile imagery, but it kind of reminds me of reading the King James Bible, which is funny because I would say that McCarthy does draw a lot of inspiration from the Bible, and he uses a lot of like literary and biblical allusions throughout the text. And I would also go as far as saying that a deep understanding of the Bible would pay off in the reading of this book, as well as some other classics such as Herman Melville's Moby Dick, John Milton's Paradise Lost, and just some other classics, because they kind of do serve as the inspirations for some of the themes utilized by McCarthy, some of his characters, and also kind of the plot as well. So what's the story of Blood Meridian? Well, it's got to do with a gang of scalp hunters headed by a man called John Glanton. And the book is kind of is set in the 1850s, and it's kind of based off true events of a similar gang that kind of operated around the US-Mexico border around that same time. And one thing to note in this novel is that there is no hero, but there is a protagonist, and the protagonist that we follow in Blood Meridian, his name is the Kid. And we follow the Kid from the time he leaves home at the age of 14, where he kind of travels around the Southern American states, and then through a series of unfortunate and climatic events, he joins the Glanton gang. And the rest of the novel kind of shows the Kid becoming like assimilated with the gang as they hunt down Native American tribes, and they the tribes that are causing the Mexican government issues, because around this time, this was after the end of the Mexican-American War, which I think ended in 1948. However, it's pretty fair to say that things kind of get out of hand very quickly, and the gang resorts to very unethical forms, like a lot of unethical behaviors, and they slaughter just like new tribes that are very peaceful, or just pretty much anyone that kind of gets in their way, because all these men that are in this gang are they're pretty much savages. So for a lot of people, what sticks out when they read this book is a character called Judge Holden. And Judge Holden can also kind of be seen as the primary antagonist of this novel as well, depending on what perspective that you take. And the judge pretty much is the right-hand man of John Glanton, and he acts as a lieutenant in the gang, and he's a very freakish looking dude. Like, he's giant. I think the description was he was like 6'6", or like past 6'6". And he's bold, he's very pale, so he's pretty much an albino. And he has no problems killing men, women, children. He's pretty much a predator and the epitome of pure evil. But that being said, the judge is incredibly educated, because he excels in his shooting, his marksmanship. He's a polyglot, so he speaks many languages, which comes in handy within the gang. He loves to dance, he likes fine art, he knows classic literature, philosophy. But the funny thing is, he's also an active geologist, and he does have a love for science. And that's kind of like a plot point that kind of becomes a little bit more important as we go on. But the judge also is a great diplomat, so he's got great diplomatic skills, which is why he's the lieutenant, because he helps John Glanton form treaties and contracts, and helps him during negotiations with governments and things like that. And again, going back to the fact that he was a geologist, because in this novel there is a lot of attention that's kind of given to rocks, and that's just something that I picked up in my last reading. And that is because there is something in this book that is as old as rocks, and finding out what that is kind of a central mystery, like a thematic mystery you can call it. And the reason why the judge is important, because he is kind of the one that instigates and carries the events of the plots. He kind of pulls the strings behind the scenes, and that kind of becomes apparent the more you read, and how kind of when you get towards the end of the book. However, when you do read this book, you do have a lot of questions such as, who is this guy? What is his origins? What's his intentions? What does he want with our protagonist, the kid? And also, what does he have in store for the Glanton gang? But the real reason why I want to talk today about the judge is because I want to explore what I think he is with what McCarthy had in mind. And put simply, I do believe that this is pretty much McCarthy's version of Satan, or it's McCarthy's Satan. And it's not hard to understand that because I just described him just then as the pure incarnation of evil. But the judge throughout the novel does kind of have an origin story. Not quite, but kind of about how he joined the gang and stuff like that. Well, the judge, he was kind of found on top of a rock when the Glanton gang was being chased out by a tribe of Amerindians, and they were kind of low on ammo and gunpowder. So the judge, what he did was that he found the gang in trouble and he guided them up a mountain where he kind of started to smash rocks and minerals in order to create this weird substance. And then he had all the members of the gang piss on the substance, which then he kind of molds and dries to create gunpowder. And through this, through him creating gunpowder, of course, the gang was able to fight off the Indians from the top of the mountain. And after this incident, the judge becomes a mainstay in the gang. So, and I do believe this was like in chapter 10 of the book as well. However, this is when a good understanding of Paradise Lost comes in, because you can see who kind of McCarthy wanted the judge to represent. Because in book 6 of Paradise Lost, we see that Satan uses gunpowder as his secret weapon against his fight with God. And this is kind of where the literary illusions kind of come in, because McCarthy was inspired by a lot of these novels, and he kind of, without these, these classics, Blood Meridian would never exist. I think he's been pretty open about that in his interviews and stuff like that. And within this world that McCarthy has created, he really is commentating on the nature of the westward expansion, which is pretty much a time period in American history where the government was expanding more towards the West Coast, and there were several acts that were sanctioned which allowed, for the massacre of the Amerindians and a lot of the indigenous groups. And the landscape that McCarthy describes here is pretty much hell, because the earth, in terms of the desert and the wasteland, are dry and desolate. It's very red, and in my opinion, it's a very, very vivid description of what we know as hell. And within the biblical canon, who resides over hell? Well, that's got to be Satan. And within this landscape, it's kind of the judge's jurisdiction. It's his land. It's what he presides over. And no one knows where he comes from. And I would say that he can be symbolized as death and war, which you can say is as old as rock. So this is kind of when that central thematic mystery kind of becomes solved, because what is as old as rocks? Human conflict, death, misery, and war. So you can say that the judge is a manifestation of that, or he is what that symbolizes. And if war and conflict is an orchestra, then McCarthy, Satan, or in this case, Judge Holden, is the conductor, and they're kind of performing in hell. And this is ironic because the westward expansion was kind of seen as a new kind of progressive gentrification of the untamed West Coast, which was supposed to lead to a better tomorrow, which is kind of what it's kind of built on today, because they progressed westwards, and society, within the West Coast has developed to what we know it to be today. However, the carnage and the brutality that had to be accomplished for this new promised land is what the judge kind of represents. And he can kind of be seen as a heroic evil. I guess that's one way that you can kind of look into this as well. And because he is an idea and a person at the same time, and he was never created, nor will he ever be destroyed. So his presence is he's very omnipresent, you could say. And there are elements of this evil that we can see in humanity, because this evil has been inherited to a lot of other people, which we can see when we look around the world today, because there's a lot of evil things that goes around when it comes to human conflict, wars, gang violence, you name it. And so the reason why I would say that the judge is an important character was because it was McCarthy's way of creating an answer to the evil that we see in the world. And instead of giving a straight answer, he kind of condensed all his theories, all his ideas and illusions into a single character we know today as the infamous Judge Holden. So for those that are interested in reading about the human condition, human nature, or even just some riveting fiction about a gang of scalp hunters, then I do recommend this book. It's not for the faint of heart, so discretion is advised. And this is mainly because due to its graphic content and how hard it is to read. However, a hack I do recommend if you do choose to read Blood Meridian is to read this book aloud, because it's much easier to follow. I've read it about, I think this is my third, this is my third time that I've finished this book. And the first time I read this, which was a while back, I pretty much read it out aloud because it's the only way that I can keep up with what's going. And also, the things that I just rambled about today are just my ideas and my thoughts right after finishing the book. So this is so I just took a couple of notes after, during my reading of the book, and this is me just talking about it. And I only read this book because in anticipation of Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer that's due to release in a couple of days, which kind of looks like it's going to dabble into similar subject matters and kind of have that same philosophical undertone of this book. So I really do recommend that you read Blood Meridian before you do watch it. And with Oppenheimer, I think they're kind of going to take more of an angle where, like a progression in science and empirical thinking brings down the fall of the older spiritual and religious ideologies that has gripped the world for the longest time. And man kind of ends up creating a tool that they thought would unite the world, but instead only brings about destruction and stuff like that. So you can kind of say that's what McCarthy was getting at in Blood Meridian with the character of Judge Holden. But, I'll leave that for you to read and understand and to kind of draw comparisons. And just about Oppenheimer as well, my thoughts will be coming out about the movie later this week. I do write essays on my Instagram page, which is or mini essays called Coldculture Films. So stay tuned for that if you're interested, and I'll also drop a link in the description of this video below as well. So do go check that out if that's something that you're interested in doing. So yeah, lesson today, read Blood Meridian. Cormac McCarthy is indeed one of the best authors that is living today. So